just mention that if you have a reasonable response to questions for Rich or for myself, please do leave them in the live chat as a super chat, and please do not leave for the end. Thank you very much in advance. So Rich, first and foremost, thank you very much for joining today.
And thanks for having me back. It's good to be here.
Great to have you on. So looking at what's going on, a lot of people are saying many different things about voter fraud in the 2020 election. Some of the states doesn't exist, other states everywhere. First, say that even one California, which obviously I don't agree with. I know you don't either. But then there are other, claims that voter fraud was localized to certain areas where it was thought ahead of time that would make a difference. And from the perspective of those things, there was mass fraud. It obviously did make a difference. So there's a lot of stuff going around about voter fraud in the 2020 race. What are your, I suppose, thoughts in a nutshell on this very volatile yet ever relevant subject matter?
Right, so it's a bit of a hoodwink, right? This idea that we have rigorous safeguards, and there's no evidence there was any voter fraud. Look, there's voter fraud in every single election in the United States of America. That was never a question. The question was whether or not it was so widespread and to so much of a degree that it had an impact on the election. And of course, this election was not like other elections, and that really is a place we have to start at. And I said this, I've said this everywhere. I'll repeat it again, just so everybody understands. This is the starting point. COVID-19 was used as a predicate to put a moratorium on election integrity laws and guidelines and verification procedures that have been long-standing in states across the country. Now, ironically, the states that are in question and the states that are having all these accusations leveled at them, these legal challenges, are the ones that used COVID-19 as a predicate to put a moratorium on their integrity laws. So that really is where we have to start. From mail-in voting, rapidly expanded this year. It is, I think, easier than people understand, or maybe people believe. It is a lot easier to commit election fraud, not voter fraud. I mean, voter fraud is when you yourself, Joseph, maybe you live at a residence now. 6 years ago, somebody else lived there. You got that unsolicited ballot or valid request, and you filled it in thinking, you know what? Because there's nobody really watching this time, I think I can go ahead and write in 2 ballots. No one's going to catch me. That's voter fraud. Yeah. We're talking more to, of course, there's always that, but we're talking more about election fraud, which is when activists and officials, we're working together, or at least working with the same goal in mind. So we're talking about a corrupted system itself. And of course, just before this election, we had evidence in the form of indictments in one of these questions, in one of these areas in question right now. So the idea that there is no election fraud is a joke. It's a total joke. So the question is how much, how big, how impactful.
And please answer that question. Obviously, I think that's what everyone really, really wants to hear right now.
Yeah, so I think the answer to that is we won't know until they give up some of these efforts to really, I'm calling it efforts to run out the clock, right? So why don't we have election day lists yet by now, right? Why can't we see why can't we see the signatures in some of these key states, right? Well, this is not something that is new to the system. This is why, too, I have told others, if you really want to make a sound argument, focus on the signature verification process, because the numbers could be so great. That's number one. The numbers could be. I think it's, again, I got to point this out. It is not difficult if you're not verifying signatures to commit some kind of fraud like this. But that's not even it. No, the bottom line is these are things we've always been entitled to. It has always been known that you can have both sides watch challenge ballots if you massively expand mail-in voting, and yet there are almost no challenges from a historical point of view. Historically speaking, if there are no challenges, even though we rapidly expanded the mail-in vote, then it's not without reason it's not outside the bounds, right, of being reasonable to ask to see those signatures. And in states like Georgia, for instance, we can't answer that question until they do. And I don't know why they wouldn't do that, Joseph, right? So why would you oppose it? There's no logical reason for it. So I think in some states we have a better grasp than others, but until we're allowed to see these things, we won't know the full picture.
I think
what people tell us.
No, I agree. Something interesting is that certain states need to be taking this more seriously, these allegations of election fraud. And they're very detailed allegations, by the way. It's not just somebody going around saying X, Y, and Z happened in the same way they would claim they saw the Loch Ness Monster this morning in the swimming pool. But it's, exactly right. There's a serious affidavits. There's a lot of them, which indicates that something is going on. You have to be sort of daft. Not you, Rich, obviously, but the rhetorical you have to be sort of daft to think that this is all, a conspiracy, that people choose to commit perjury en masse because they have nothing better to do on any given day. But in Pennsylvania, the legislature there is taking this very, very seriously by all accounts. And yet in places like Georgia, and I was going to say, Arizona's having a hearing now, so you really can't complain about that. But Georgia, the response from the Republican government there seems extremely lackadaisical. It's worth noting that Pennsylvania has a divided government between the executive branch and the state legislature, but the state legislature still is going, full throttle on investigating this stuff. And yet, then you have, I suppose, Michigan and Wisconsin, which Michigan's going to have a hearing too, so you really can't complain about that. I think the Republican Party there has been as serious as it can be about looking at election fraud. Wisconsin's still an ongoing recount, so I really can't say much one way or the other. But Georgia, and it would have been Arizona, but I heard today that the hearing isn't back going to happen there. But Georgia, to me, stands out as a place where the Republican so-called public servants are just dropping the ball completely relative to the best case scenario for Trump, such as Pennsylvania. Rich, any thoughts on why these allegations of election fraud are being handled in such a radically different fashion between these places?
Well, I will say this, that I find it odd because in Georgia, it really is, Georgia could be, and we're living in unprecedented times, right? So the president has an uphill battle to be sure, but we live in a time of firsts, right? And Georgia is, I believe, the one state where you could really pop the cork on this whole thing, Joseph, and it all just comes flying out. So just so people understand what I mean by how easy and, from looking at it from a historical point of view, in Gwinnett County, Georgia alone, 4 years ago, 12% of mail-in ballots were rejected and not counted. 2 years ago, that number only ticked down about 5 points. This year, there's almost nothing that was rejected or challenged. And if Gwinnett alone returned to its historical rate of rejection rate for absentee mail-in ballots, then we would be talking about a whole different election. And once that was to happen, then it's really like the floodgates just come, it just all opens up. And then one state is going to be used as an example. Like, look, Pennsylvania, you can't treat voters, two different groups of voters, differently when it comes to verification, which is, by the way, the law. There's precedent. You cannot treat election day voters differently than you treat mail-in voters. They must be subjected to the same verification procedures. And that didn't happen in Georgia. So if that was all to come crashing open in Georgia, then that would lead, I do believe that would lead to a chain a reaction. So basically a domino effect. Isn't it funny that there you have a state that's a Republican government, and yet with such an opportunity, right, for the president's team, and yet nothing's happening. It just, maybe it really is the uniparty at work. I mean, really, there are many people in the Republican Party who don't like the president and never will, and are praying for a time when it's gone. Now, I know from my conversations with party leaders, that's not necessarily true at all. In fact, they're doing their damnedest. But it doesn't matter if you can't get the governor to listen, Joseph. If you have the Secretary of State openly lying to the public about how these ballots were handled, how they were processed, their chain of custody, he has no idea whether these ballots are valid or not. And he just goes to the microphone. I have the utmost confidence. He is so full of crap. He doesn't know it all. And that's why you saw Governor Kemp finally start to move towards, you know what, maybe they have a point with the signatures. He knows, of course, there's a point with the signatures. It's a song and dance.
And of course, the Secretary of State you're referring to is Brad Raffensperger, who is an interesting guy. I think he claims that his family voted for Trump and donated to him, but he's been on CNN and he's been at USA Today. He wrote an article for them, essentially being rather nasty toward the Republican Party. In USA Today, he said Trump threw him under the bus. And when he went on CNN, he all but accused Lindsey Graham of felonious election interference. Something's not right with Raffensperger. Some people say that he's trying to hide something that he's done. I don't know about that. My more plausible explanation is that he knows he's going to lose re-election as primary if he runs. Big question. He's trying to establish himself as a never Trumper pundit. Any guys post thoughts on the unique Raffensperger situation?
Yeah, I think, he's making all the moves and all the comments of a scared man, right? So I think he sees the danger. There's minefields all over on the ground ahead of him, and he doesn't know which way to turn. That's when ultimately, and when you're in public life like this, ultimately the right place to turn, of course, is the legal way to turn. And he has he built this on himself. He put this on himself. So that was an abdication of his administration's duty. We had been for 2 months talking about what a quagmire this election would turn out to be if we continued down this path. And you said it yourself. Many of these states were Republican-led legislatures, and they didn't really seem to grasp the problem at hand. Well, here in Georgia, they got rolled. I mean, they just got completely rolled. They didn't understand the problem, and they didn't understand what they were setting themselves up for. And it's hard to undo that later. And when you're a guy like him, you're a politician. What's he most concerned in the world about? Being criticized and being defeated and losing political capital. So I think he tried to dance there for a little bit, and then played the media game, like you said, ran to CNN as if that was going to help him. I mean, that was a complete backfire. They've abdicated that election over to Stacey Abrams' crew, and they don't know how to take it back.
I'm 100% correct. Yeah, I think this is a little off topic. I'll just say quickly. I think that Raffensperger and Kemp, if they somehow win their primaries, which I strongly doubt will happen, they would certainly lose. Even if there was a red wave, as it would be called, 2022, I think they would certainly lose to Abrams and her slew of candidates in Georgia. Georgia's just a state that is. I mean, I think it's very clear there was election fraud there. But it's a state that even beyond even just legitimate votes, it is trending leftward at a rapid pace. And my perspective, Rich, is that's becoming the Illinois of the South. I call it Southern Fried Illinois, because you have essentially a largely rural state that's dominated by one urban center and its suburbs. And I think that Georgia is following the Illinois dynamic, and it probably will be a Democratic state within the next 10 years. Any thoughts on what I just brought up before we go back to election fraud issues?
Yeah, so there is something going on in Georgia. There's no doubt. There's something going on in Georgia that we did see in other states. The trend didn't continue the way Democrats would have liked in some of these other states, but in Georgia it has so far. So, take a state like Texas, and that's why, to some degree, we would have expected an increase in the vote in the Atlanta area, the metro area, and the surrounding suburbs, because we see a lot of people moving into that area. The demographics have changed dramatically over the last 10 years. Still, and that is a problem, long-term, midterm to long-term, for the Republican Party, because they relied a lot on goodwill instead of data and ground game, right? Good old-fashioned. They were like, Georgia's red, and we have a couple years, and that's it, And unfortunately, it takes a party losing to really sometimes look in the mirror, to see what they did wrong. That's just, unfortunately, the nature of our business. The same guys they get in, the same consultants, the same pollsters, and as long as they keep winning, then they never really give leaders or political figures the advice that is necessary to preserve their long-term electoral viability. But in the end, I think Georgia's a bit of a case. I did not think we were at that point yet. I think it was more comparable to Texas, where the two biggest growing metro areas, are both in Texas. And so we expected bigger numbers out of Texas. Indeed, we got bigger numbers out of Texas. What we didn't get were votes trickling in 48 hours, 72 hours later that started to approach, in certain precincts, the levels that reach mandatory voting nation levels, which does not happen in the United States of America, folks. So again, it is not uncommon for ballots to be rejected at what you may consider high rates, because ballots have issues. It is more than glaring. You can't just overlook it, how low these rejection rates are here. It is more than enough in those 5 counties to overturn the election. And Trump would have a comfortable win if you just applied historical rejection rates to those 5 counties. And I'd be even willing to be generous and basically average out the last 4 or 6 years, right? Including midterms, because they get better, states get better, politicians get better, election officials get better at doing their jobs. People, however, do not get better as quick as we would like them to. So you would still expect to see a higher rejection rate. But even if I was to be conservative and generous and say average it together, it would be more than enough to topple Georgia. More than enough. We need to be close.
I don't doubt in the slightest. Talking about, I suppose, precincts with 100% or even north of 100% turnout, there have been some people who said that this, seemingly impossible situation is legitimate. I think there was one precinct around the University of Central Florida, and obviously Florida, and it was specifically in Orange County, Orlando, that had 100% turnout, and there weren't any allegations of fraud there. Do you think that this is something like a once in a blue moon type of deal, or can it happen in various states legitimately to a surprising degree? What's your take on that phenomenon?
The problem with that explanation is a couple-fold. But first, even if you have, let's say a county has 200,000 registered voters, okay? And you would expect every single person on election day to turn out, and you could try to make an excuse for it. The problem with that is being registered to vote in the United States of America is not the same as being eligible to vote. So we have registration records all over the country that are still on the voter rolls, but they should not be there. Maybe they have a change of address flag. They moved away. They left Orange County many years ago, but it takes time for the state to catch up. Same thing when grandma and grandpa or mom and dad pass away, you get your funeral arrangements going. You grieve your lost loved one. You do not call the Secretary of State or the local supervisor of election and say, you know what, Pop just died, take him off the voter rolls, right? I mean, who does that, right? It takes time for these states to catch up. So the idea that you would have every single record cast a ballot is ridiculous on its face. And that's why it never happens except for these isolated incidents, which everybody always raises their eyebrow and says, how did that happen? This is what I would tell people. This election, people are asking us to swallow a lot of historic firsts, okay? By that, I mean, there are areas in this country that swing the nation. And when they go, so goes the presidency. All right. We're talking about 200 plus pivot counties that voted for Barack Obama, that turned and voted for Donald Trump. We have 10 that basically predict the election winner every single time. We have counties like Juneau, Wisconsin, that are bellwethers every single election for their state. We were not told Joe Biden was going to win this election because he was going to run up these ungodly numbers in these certain areas where it really matters, right? No, we were told the election was going to pivot on these pivot counties. Right as soon as Vigo, Indiana came in, one of the very first pivot counties to come in, it was very clear. It was Trump plus 15 in 16. It was Trump plus 15 in 2020. All right. There was no loss. There was no base loss. All right. Pike, same thing. Go overlay Iowa in 2016 with Iowa in 2020. Joe Biden didn't take back a single pivot county in Ohio. Woods County did not go. In Trumbull County did not go. Juneau County, Wisconsin did not go. Macomb County, Michigan did not go. None of these pivot counties pivoted. I mean, this is what people should really understand. There are these surges disproportionately in these metro areas that are huge for a man who didn't even have a get out the vote operation. So for everybody to sit back and pretend like you're in left field wondering what happened here or wondering whether or not it's legitimate to investigate some of these affidavits is ludicrous. They're asking you to swallow something that is more than a historic first. It looks like a historic anomaly. I mean, just beyond reason. So to take a woman's affidavit in Wayne County who says she was taught to backdate ballots and taught to allow these ineligible records to go through, to not investigate that because you want to bury everything and turn the page in the book is crazy when you look at all these historic firsts. It just didn't happen. Joseph, there are counties that immediately, right in the beginning of the night, you'll look at them and you'll say, uh-oh, so-and-so's going to have a bad night. That didn't happen. It didn't happen. What happened was the election day margin overtook in every state we had the absentee ballot reported by normal deadlines. And the election day margin overtook that. It happened in North Carolina. It happened in Texas. It happened in Florida. Joe Biden did not really get the monster lead in that vote that we're told he was going to get. And then the election day margin was bigger for Donald Trump than everybody expected it was going to be. And that's why you saw a very traditional red right hook in Florida, a very traditional red right hook in North Carolina. All right. And it just won by one by one. And it was only when those states that did not have integrity deadlines, those are the states where everything went awry for the president. So even by Joe Biden's own standards in the state of Pennsylvania, for instance, he was going to lose that state, even by his own campaign's projections, because nobody expected another 750,000 absentee ballots to just float out of the sky 2 or 3 days later. They had 2.4 million before the election day bell rang, and it took them 2 weeks to amass that much. So, maybe, like I said, maybe mail-in ballot changing that did change the nature of our election so dramatically that it explains all of these historic firsts. But excuse me for not being willing to just bury my head in the sand while a bunch of people are trying to raise a red flag.
And before I get back to the issue about UCF, looking at what happened in Pennsylvania, something you brought up, there is a discrepancy between the amount of ballots requested, mail ballots to be precise, right, and the amount of mail ballots received and tabulated. Explain that a bit, Rich, because obviously on its face, this sounds like an impossible situation. I think it was sort of an aha moment at the state Senate hearing there.
Yeah, and also just to give everybody play devil's advocate here, what they're going to say is these ballots came in later and they weren't processed because we weren't able to handle them up until a certain time. Folks, all of that is hogwash. Ohio has some of the most strict standards in the country about when they can actually handle absentee ballots. They manage to process and count theirs, no problem. Florida is the gold standard, in my opinion. I really do believe so. They can begin to handle them 24 days before an election. Of course, they can't count them, which I think some people don't understand the difference. You're not tabulating how many votes went to who. You're simply handling and processing the ballots to be counted later. What Pennsylvania is going to say is that 740,000 plus ballots arrived later that still were eligible to be counted. And my point has been that on election night, we get these numbers, folks. There were 2.4 million cast, even though about 3.1 and change were requested. But here's another issue with that excuse that you're hearing. Getting a ballot in Pennsylvania does not mean you actually requested one. There were auto triggers in different areas like Bucks County. So the idea that everyone who got an auto ballot, right, we would have returned it. It's again, maybe all of these things, are changed now that we have quasi mail-in voting elections in this country. But is it more likely that you gave people, you basically left your keys on the bar when you went to go to the bathroom and the car thief was sitting next to you at the bar, right? I mean, is it more plausible? Which one is more plausible, right? Which one's more plausible?
Yeah, the situation is one that obviously you see how it can be exploited for fraud. Absolutely. But it's like, because some people don't have video of somebody actually doing the fraud, they say, it never happened. It's a little ridiculous, more than a little ridiculous. But yeah, the situation in Pennsylvania does strike me as odd because there's obviously a certain number of requested mail ballots that the state had, and then the discrepancy of several hundred thousand. And the excuse, as you mentioned, is that the state says it just didn't have time essentially to tabulate the request ahead of or whatever. So I don't know how anybody would really take that seriously, especially also considering what you said about what happens in other states like Ohio and Florida. It's a bizarre situation, to say the absolute least.
Yeah, I just don't buy those, right? Because maybe it's because we're Florida guys. I mean, we remember how this used to be down there, right? And then when years ago, it's important to remember that once upon a time, Democrats never argued with what we're saying right now. This was a bipartisan effort in Florida where we came together and we said we no longer want to be the laughingstock of the country. What can we do to make sure that we don't end up like this ever again? And that's why really we are the gold standard. Every ballot is treated the same for verification across the board. If you are subject to signature match election day, you are subject to signature match for absentee ballots. End of story. And then of course by 8 p.m. on election night, how many absentee ballots do you have? Don't give me this nonsense at 2 a.m. that you found 35,000 more ballots. That is how you open. You're asking for it, folks. You're asking for people. Look, we are not a species subjected to laws because we naturally do the right thing. Laws are there for a reason because unfortunately people in power like to abuse them and their authority. Okay, so it'd be a little bit naive to pretend like if you give these officials an opportunity to commit this kind of mass fraud that they just wouldn't do it. They would pass it by. I mean, you really have to be kind of foolish, and I mean really green behind. You are really green. There were numerous officials who repeatedly, and you know this, Joseph, repeatedly ignored the integrity deadlines for different categories of votes, and they were removed. And isn't it amazing? Two things happened when they were removed. One, Republicans seemed to win a lot more votes in those areas, didn't they? That's number one. Number two, the election went off without a hitch. Votes were counted, no problem. A state that has more, sometimes in many of these Midwest cases, 2-3 times the number of voters in these states, and they were able to count them, tabulate them, and package it up. We're good to go. And they certified way before any of these other states could even dream of certifying the results. I mean, folks, there was once upon a time where Democrats not only did not argue this, it was common sense. If you give these people the opportunities that you gave them this time, they of course will commit fraud. Come on.
Yeah, it's part of human nature, unfortunately. And there's something. Yep. Yeah, no question. If there's something in the live chat for some and I will just reiterate that if you have a reasonable responsible question, Rich or myself, please do leave in the live chat as a super chat. We'll get to it, but please don't leave it all up. Yeah, thank you very much in advance. Looking here at the UCF website, the story from November 4th is UCF voting precinct tops 100% turnout. UCF voting precinct 538 saw 107%, 107.56% turnout in the 2020 election. Yes, that number is right. The 811 ballots cast in the precinct, which consists solely of students who live on campus, include early voting, vote by mail, and in-person election day voting. So how do you get more than 100% turnout? This year, the deadline to register to vote was October 6th. And on that date, 754 voters were registered in the district. Nearly 6,000 students live on campus, but can choose to keep their parents' or family's address as their primary residence for various reasons. Since there is no deadline in Florida for registered voters who want to update their address, changes can happen up through election day. Additional on-campus residents updating their addresses from October 6th to November 3rd, changing from other voting precincts to UCS and accounting for the higher than expected turnout. An interesting story, to say the least. And it's worth noting that even the Republicans didn't claim any fraud in this precinct, but I still find it to be highly strange. And Florida does have, as you mentioned, Rich, very sophisticated vote tabulation and reporting apparatus. So looking at the situation I just described at UCF, how would you approach something like that? Would it be like an example of a maybe like blue moon, honest turnout surge, or do you think that something like this is probably deserving of more serious scrutiny?
Yeah, so just off the bat, to be clear, I did hear about this, but I did not personally check on it. So I just, let people know that, just because there are other states we've been focusing our efforts on. But what I would say is this: everyone should really understand this, especially in that state, that if it is true, that could not have happened without some kind of effort or enabling by people in official positions. All right, and this is something that we have come to realize when we're looking at some of these other states. There is a difference, like I said, between voter and election fraud. There is a difference, and there are. A state like Michigan, for instance, where we're finding a lot of the irregularities that we're finding. It's the same clerks that keep popping up, right? So those signatures would not match. You would have run into change of address flags. You would have run into, I'm sure, just even in an area like that, deceased people on the rolls. It's just not only is it unbelievable to get turnout that high or exceed that, it's not at all plausible because we're not 100% of people are not still eligible. It never works out that way, guys. There are never rolls that are clean across the board. It's just, unfortunately, it's not how our system works. It's dirty and it's a slow system and it takes time to catch up. All right, so I haven't looked at that specific example, but of course I think it would say if it's true, it would definitely warrant further investigation because this is what is becoming a pattern. There are the same names of people who just keep popping up and up. It's actually at the point now where we're trying to bait officials, where they delete certain records that we kind of wink to them that we have. And hey, this doesn't make sense. Take screenshots of them and then wait for them to delete them, Joseph, which we are seeing officials do. And that will all be when we release what we found, which is what got us banned, by the way, from Twitter. That is what got us banned. When we told PolitiFact they could no longer have any more records, that they will read it like everybody else will read it online. They clearly ran to Twitter and got us zapped. The message to them was, what, we can't shut them down. We can't shut them down. You got to do it. You're going to have to do it. And they pulled the plug because we kind of baited them a little bit. Yeah, here's a few. Here's a few. Go look at it. And then all of a sudden they're gone. They're no longer on the XML, the CSV spreadsheets, right? They're taken down. So that would suggest that the reporters were actively telling these officials, hey, these records aren't cool. Something happened here. If you don't have an explanation, you better delete them. And I'm not talking about deleting them from the count. I'm talking about deleting them from the public-facing websites where you could look up a voter and their activity. Many cases, these voters were inactive and had been inactive many years ago, but they somehow reactivated themselves, which requires you to do in Florida, go to the Secretary of Supervisor of Elections, update your information, show ID, give them it, right? You know the process. Yep. How did this happen? Who did this, right? So the question is, did that vote count? That's, of course, the number one. And that's what we've been doing, chasing down those. And then the second question is, who did this? Because I'll tell you right now, in a state like Michigan, it's a lot. And we've been in Michigan and Georgia mostly to investigate some of this stuff. But when the president's team went to the microphone and said that roughly 10,000 change of address flags, it didn't surprise me at all because Clark County, it represents 68% of the total vote statewide, but it represents about 85% of the dirty rolls that I'm trying to talk to you guys about. And I really did try for 2 months before this election to say, listen, it'll be the Wild West in a place like Clark County if they get what they want. Because even if all counties wanted to do this proportionately, you couldn't, because blue areas make up disproportionately make up the more dirtier of the rolls. So, it's just, and it's not a matter of population, because it's disproportionate. It's more than that.
Yeah, it's worth noting, I did see, using the Pennsylvania website, which I believe you have access to, and now it's been revoked. I saw someone who was born in the 1860s having voted by mail in September of this year. You wouldn't mind, before we get to the live chat, explaining what happened, how the Pennsylvania Secretary of State's office revoked access to this website during the legislative hearing that just took place. I think that really tells a story in and of itself about what's going on here.
Yeah, and they'll tell you that they're trying to update it, of course, right? So, they got all these ballots coming in, they're stale now, right? So they're trying to update. I mean, it's really, you would have to swallow a lot to really believe this. But I would tell, I hear Republicans focusing in that instance, by the way, in Philadelphia and Allegheny. And then, of course, Wayne is the big culprit in Michigan. But I will say this. It's not that those areas don't represent it disproportionately, like I said, but it's everywhere. It's everywhere, Joseph, which is why I was saying the question of who did this, because it's everywhere. I mean, I'm looking at one right now, and I won't blow it up because we're calling the families of these people. All right, that's where we're at now. All right, you have to be this thorough with them, right? This woman, born in 1950, August 3rd, 1950. Her application date was for October 5th. The ballot was sent in the 6th, received by the 14th. Voted record on the Secretary of State as counted. Yes, that's precinct 5 in Macomb, right? This township clerk comes up over and over and over when we find these questionable records. You can read about this person's death, not only in an index, all right, but on the obituary, which is in the local paper. So, I mean, it's just over and over again, and you would think that's an area Donald Trump carried. He carried it handily, right? But he was farther ahead before some of these votes came in. So before this woman's vote, and it's a woman, I'll say that, and before this woman's votes, and along with many others, came in after the first wave of early vote, and then the election day vote was the second wave, and there were the ballot dumps at 4:50 in the morning from 8, right? And at that time, Donald Trump was over 60% in Monroe. He was almost 60% in Macomb, and it was those ballot dumps that pulled him down to the mid to low 53, 54, right? So it really goes to show you, Republicans like to pick on those areas. But I just think that maybe they just sowed so much hatred for this man. There were a bunch of people acting independently that were doing this, because the answer that a lot of these officials like to give us was that we don't know if that counted yet. You'll have to wait before we can conclusively say it counted. But that doesn't answer the question of who was doing this, does it? Right? So somebody did this on October 5th. Somebody got a ballot request, an absentee ballot request, like we had shown on our show over and over again. One guy sent me from Macomb. He had 6 of them. It was everybody who lived at his house for the last 20 years. So all you had to do was answer those ballot requests. And these clerks, same clerks over and over again, did not confirm whether or not this was a legitimate ballot. And that's just the truth. That happened.
I have no doubt at all. I was going to say, before the live chat, have the Trump campaign or anyone contacted you, Rich, about doing, I suppose, talking to a legislative panel or something like that about what you've uncovered? Because certainly I think that would be an appropriate place to share this kind of information.
Yeah, I've basically gotten calls from everybody and their mother almost, right? I will say this, some people want it. So the left, right, they want it, and they want it premature so they can try to discredit whatever little maybe T you didn't cross or I you didn't dot. The right, they want it soon, and sooner the better, because they want to try to prevent Joe Biden from being seated. So I understand everyone has an agenda. I will take the time to talk to anybody, and I have, to explain how this happened. Because I hate to say this, but a lot of people just really didn't understand how easy this was. They didn't understand how chain of custody works. I had to explain this to a lot of people for the first time, and multiple times, which gets a little bit irritating, right? And I'll be happy to explain it to anybody who's really, but in our situation, I can't move at a pace that others might want me to, because we just have to be fair. It has to be done right. It has to be done correctly.
No question about it. Especially because so many people, even if you do everything correctly, will claim that you did everything incorrectly. So
right.
The necessity for being thorough is heightened, to say the absolute least. I mean, anybody should always want to be on their game, but with folks who are actively trying to detract from your accuracy, even though it's not their job to do that, but they assume it. Very, very difficult stuff, and you have to be as on point as possible. So it's good to hear that you're doing precisely that. From Bojack Woes, when the mainstream media spins and says there's no evidence or it's a conspiracy, this is an overt lie. Why are so many ostensibly smart people falling for this? That's a great question, Bojack. I think by and large, it's because a lot of people simply want to believe it. If you get people who support Biden or hate Trump or whatever, it's simply because they want Trump to win, and so it's better just to believe something like this and put it out of their mind. If you even have people who supported Trump, I've heard some people want him to concede anyway. It's because they're emotionally distraught by what happened. They want to move on, and the whole nature of him contesting this stuff sort of like makes them relive for them the traumatic event of seeing him be declared a loser by the media. That would be my guess for why this is Bojack. I think it's all fundamentally emotional and not rational in the slightest. Rich, anything to say about what Bojack brought up?
Yeah, I would also just add to that. I think, from people who do what I do, and then other, we want to call them pundits, whatever they want to call themselves. I think it's fear, even on the right. This has always been an issue where, I don't know if you call it a third rail, but certainly it could get you in a lot of professional trouble. And if you do make a mistake, then you could be hurt bad by it politically or professionally, I would say. Me, I just don't care, because I'm independent and I don't need to rely on anybody to feed me, kind of thing. So I guess I have a leeway that other people don't have. But there's also what you said too, Joseph. I mean, in the end, people have a hard time wanting to believe how bad it could be and how easy it could be to do this. And folks, I'm telling you, it's easy. It is easy. You have a woman like Reality Winner, who works for the National Security Agency, willing to give up her entire career, her entire life, her future on the line to leak a document to hurt Donald Trump, right? Because the media had it just totally convinced he's an enemy, et cetera, et cetera. Especially when you dehumanize somebody, like they dehumanized Donald Trump. He's a Nazi, right? So you find yourself in this weird position where you're actually not doing anything wrong by committing these crimes. In fact, you're the hero in the story. You're the hero. You're not breaking the law, but you are, in fact, the hero who stood up to the tyranny in their day, in their lifetime, right? So I know it's twisted, it's crazy, but I think a lot of Americans are uncomfortable accepting how dirty the voter rolls are, how easy they are to manipulate, how easy it may be to steal elections. And I'm not just talking about a couple hundred votes, guys. I'm talking about thousands and thousands of votes. And one thing I will say too, with your last question, Joseph, part of it that got me a little bit bothered is, like I said, I'm willing to explain this stuff to anybody who calls, but I do feel like a lot of it was a distraction. And signature verification alone could open the floodgates on this whole thing. If you're really trying to make a first, right? Which it would be a first if Donald Trump could prevent Joe Biden from being seated, by the Electoral College. It would be a first. If you're trying to do that, you shouldn't be trying to reinvent the wheel. And I think people going off in different directions kind of led me to just kind of step back away from some of what they were doing and the people they were surrounding themselves with, because that's not my forte. I mean, I was going on and on about how easy it is to manipulate mail-in balloting for months, and then to try to throw in things about voting machines. I mean, maybe at some point that's warranted, Joseph. Maybe at some point that's a valid thing, but it's not necessary, and nor is it. All that does is let them try to lump you all in the same basket, really.
I'll just put it this way. Neither you or I are subjects of Powell's dominion. And that's not, meant to be an insult toward her or anyone else. But as I've been trying to tell people, I'm not a lawyer, you're not a lawyer. But it's fair to say that we both, because of the nature of what we do, we've had a good deal of exposure to how the legal system works, specifically so far as elections go, and people contesting them. And it's very hard to put what she's claiming into a suit that goes anywhere. Mike Kelly's suit is probably the strongest one thus far, and that was filed in Pennsylvania Commonwealth, or State Court Commonwealth. And it wound up getting a preliminary injunction, which is now being appealed to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But from there, we go to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it's a very solid suit that he files, only 20 pages. Even someone with a middling IQ can make sense of it. Powell's suit, just one of them, is 104 pages. And after reading only a little bit of it, I actually started to rub my head, no exaggeration, because it was, it's a lot. There's no other way to put it, unless I'm not going to deep detail here, but it is a lot. And I'm not saying that she's doing anything wrong or something wrong track or whatever, but, the suits of that nature rarely do find success in court, even if they have great points to make, because it's a labyrinthine thing, and you're sort of asking like judges to learn new things in order to understand what you're saying. And,
That's exactly right.
It's hard. It's hard. Anything you want to say about that, Rich, before we move on to other stuff?
That really just, you're asking a judge to learn about something that they don't know that much about. Some of it just flatly didn't make sense either. I mean, the fact of the matter is, with how votes are counted in this country and how, some of the processes, in some of the claims, I'm not saying, because I didn't pay attention to every single one of them, but in some cases, I could just tell you guys, it's not how votes are counted, right? In some of these areas. So I'm like, this doesn't jive. And then secondly, if you look at what they meaning Democrats, if you look at what they did leading up into this election, again, going back to COVID being used as a predicate, the first goal was clear: vastly and rapidly expand the pool of potential ballots that will be floating around everywhere. So whether you're in Clark County and they're pinned up to the court boards and in apartment center common rooms, right? This is crazy stuff going on. Where, like Fox said, littering the streets, of the boulevard, right, of the strip. It was crazy. And then also having ballot requests in states like Michigan go out everywhere, where to the point where you may have lived at your house for 2 years, but you were getting a ballot request for a dirty change of address flag record that no longer lives there. But guess what? You fill it out. Nobody, because bullet point 2 is no verification procedures. So we're going to get this pool of balloting expanded, and then we're going to remove the verification procedures for them and the integrity guidelines to report them. Because, guys, how an election night rolls in, everyone has to tell you how many in-person early votes do you have, how many mail-in votes do you have, and how many election day votes do you have. 3 categories generally, but aside from provisionals, right? How many of these categories do you have? That's it. Deadline. End of story. You cannot fabricate 50,000 more after this deadline. Okay. That's why those laws are in place. That's why those provisions are in place. And they wanted to expand it. They wanted to remove the verification procedures. And then the final was having somebody go out and get them. And whether it was activists who were pretending like I got in trouble by Twitter for simply grabbing what former Obama speechwriter said. He was down in Georgia. You cannot cure or fix ballots after the election. That is illegal. Okay. And what they were doing, I just said, this is what I'm talking about, guys. You were all wondering why I'm harping on deadlines, because if you don't impose them and enforce them, you will have guys like this running all over the place, fabricating ballots for the next 48 to 72 hours. Twitter nails me on it. He is the one doing it, and it's blatant, and it's illegal, and they nail me on it, right? But that was a great example of what I'm talking about. And then in some cases, it appears the U.S. Postal Service helped them do that, and in others, you just had teams of people like in Clark County that was actually taxpayer funded to run around and break state law, because it is against the law to harvest ballots in the state of Nevada. But for some reason, you have to socially distance to the point where poll watchers aren't allowed to oversee the counting process and the verification, right? But you're allowed to have harvesters go around and help people fix their ballots. It's a scam. It was a total scam, and nothing with Dominion or anything else spoke to that. That was never, if you were watching it, what they were doing and requesting leading up to this election, those were really the big 3. And any major impact the election may have, that these changes may have had on the election would have came through those 3 provisions. And indeed they did. And to talk about something else is just distracting. And it's just not helpful, because if you don't recognize what happened here and fix it for the future, this is going to end badly for us. It will
Agreed entirely. I have nothing to add there, other than to say I think it is the smartmatic choice to let Powell's dominion fend for itself. So moving on to what DW Iris Hickey said, status of Baris's data analyses in court filings.
In court filings? Mm-hmm. I don't know. People can use, I did give, look, I'll be honest. I'll just tell people right now. I gave some stuff to the John James campaign they specifically asked me for something specific. I gave it to them, Look, if it was the Democrats, I would do the same thing. I got to tell you, if the Republicans robbed, this is something that maybe separates me from the Nate Slimers and the other frauds of the world, okay? If it was the same thing on the other side. So for instance, if I caught the Republicans in North Carolina 2 years ago and the Democrats came to me and said, do you have evidence that they committed absentee ballot fraud like this? I would say, absolutely. Because you just can't commit fraud. Everyone has to have, and I maybe sound naive and idealistic, but at the very least, everybody has to have some semblance of, confidence in the integrity of the election result. You cannot go election to election to election having one candidate or another being called illegitimate, especially not at the presidency. And we just had that happen 4 years ago, right? For 4 years, we heard this president was illegitimate. He colluded with Vladimir Putin to steal the election. Russia did it, blah, blah, blah. It was all nonsense. Yet we were subjected to it and had to get a special counsel over it, even though there was no evidence. But there are people like me and others out there who are advancing evidence, and that we have in some cases given it to them. I'm going to be open about that. But we're not done. We're not done because we did already, in the case of Michigan specifically, we did foresee where they were going to go with this, Joseph. So we knew how they were going to try to weasel out of this, and we just boxed him in a corner. And we brought someone in who is an independent fraud guy, and we all don't work as fast as we'd like, but he's doing it thoroughly. And in the end, when we're done, they'll be boxed in a corner, and the lies that they can tell PolitiFact. Some garbage nonsense response. It doesn't account for the names that we have and the entries that we have. And I've given them to some. I have. I'm sure the Wayne Canvas board that deadlocked. I'm sure they got it too because we gave it to people who are involved in it. Oh well.
They were really, the Wayne Canvassing Board, the Republicans there were, I don't use this word very often, but rather I think heroic in their actions. They really, I think, rose to the occasion, and they deserve immense credit for what they did. From Blog of the West, which foreign country had most influence this time? Well, I think just say Russia, to suppose illustrate the absurdity of so many claims about Russia over the last few years. I think certainly in terms of creating this post-election nightmare, there were foreign countries that had influence. I would say Russia's probably not first among them if it was even there. China certainly comes to mind, and maybe even Iran. Those are mine too. The two in my field of vision, if you will. Rich, anything to say about what Blog of the West brought up?
Yeah, I would say China probably because of the money impact. Somebody had to, stuff. I'm sure some people did what we are finding for ideological reasons because they were told Trump is the great devil and Satan, like I said. So you delude people into thinking that they're actually doing a good thing by doing what we are catching people doing. So I'm sure some of that, but other has to be money, right? If you thought Hillary Clinton got Wall Street contribution edges over Donald Trump, that was about 3-1. It's going to be 6-1 by the time that's done. I know for a fact and can tell people that China had a huge role in pushing Joe Biden to even run. So their friends on Wall Street, their friends on K Street, also Joe's friends. Joe has been K Street's buddy for 4 decades. Like some of these people, Joseph, I got to just say this, they're really making me laugh. Like the Aaron Brockoviches and what's the other one who complained about Joe Biden having the pharmaceutical guy, around. I mean, I'm just reading all these columns laughing hysterically because you really need a better source of news. I mean, 4 decades, this man is around. 4 decades, he never rejected a call from these K Street people. So I don't know what made you think he was going to be some kind of like power to the people president who was going to fill his cabinet and advise. That's crazy, man. I mean, anybody who followed Joe Biden for 4 years would tell you that was never going to happen. But I would say China because they really did. I don't know why this isn't being reported more. Like, for instance, I know a certain Fox Business guy, Charlie Gasparino. You know what I'm talking about, Charlie. Don't pretend like you don't. You're speaking to the same people I am. This man was pushed into it. Those people have direct connections to China. It's kind of scary a little bit, but it is what it is.
Definitely. And from Statics, did they blackmail Governor Kemp Scarborough style? Well, we don't really know what happened. There's no official record of Scarborough having been blackmailed or anything like that. I'll say before people, say God, it was a conspiracy theory. So I'm sure Rich is on the same page there. But there's no indication that Scarborough was blackmailed. But I will say about Governor Kemp, I have heard lots of stuff about him, and some of it, there are allegations that he's essentially taking money from Dominion, and that's why he's doing what he's doing. And some say he did something that would result in Dominion or whoever blackmailing him. I obviously have no idea about any of that. I've not seen any evidence in favor. I've not seen any evidence in favor of Scarborough being blackmailed. My perspective on Kemp is that he's a very weak man who's not used to running in close elections, and he sort of was like a deer caught in the headlights. And he probably had more confidence in Raffensperger than he should have when he saw that was not working out for him. And then he's heard Trump's calls for for more aggressive audit recount. He then just made the fairly weak statement about signature verification. I think Kemp is really just a weak man who is sort of in a way indicative of a lot of Southern so-called conservatives. They talk tough, real macho bullshit like in the primary, but unlike the Northern Republicans, when the push comes to shove, they're stunned. And I think in part it's because they're not used to dealing with close elections and the whole political culture that comes about from close elections. And also it could just be because they're used to more gentlemanly style of politicking moreover. But who really knows? But no, I've not seen anything to say that Kemp is blackmail. I just think he's a very, very weak guy who was caught between a rock and a hard place, and he folded like a cheap suit. Rich, anything to say about what Statics brought up?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to put it. I think he's weak, and that is generally that Southern Republican Party. It's just true. They're like you said, they have been and I mentioned this before. They're not used to these kinds of dragged out dog, or even in the mud kind of fights, right? And they've been relying on the goodwill of a Republican base, an outsized Republican base for their states for many, many years, as opposed to actually doing the hard work or fighting the hard fight. And Kemp, think about this guy, Stacey Abrams. He allowed her to accuse him of being a racist, voter suppression. He purged the voter rolls. He only won because he kept all of these black people off the rolls. I really couldn't tell you, even if that was logistically possible, which it's not, because secretaries of states don't have direct control over that. Her beef would have been with a local supervisor of election in Fulton in DeKalb, right? And all of these different areas that are blue because they were crying about blue areas. But the rolls in Georgia, now that we've had time to look at them, because we have in detail, are very dirty. Very dirty. And I don't know how you could accuse anybody of purging, right? That word purge, like it's that movie where we kill everybody once a year. I mean, it's great, right? These are sensational words they use, but in truth, you could go to the voter rolls and find 10 dead people in under, a couple of minutes. I mean, they're dirty. They are people who have gone. They left Georgia many years ago, yet somehow they're still in the voter rolls. And then even people who are new. And they really kick themselves in the butt allowing motor voter because they're just, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but there's clearly, Joseph, the cause of a lot of these irregularities would never have happened if it wasn't for motor voter. I'll just put it like that.
that's been an issue for many years on end, and now we're just getting around to dealing with it. But yes, a horrendous development. A little too complex here, but folks should look it up and they'll see why Rich and I believe what we do with regard to it. From Jonathan Gillespie, will this fiasco force genuine election reform, i.e., return to paper ballots and signature matches, regardless of who's the legal winner of the election? I don't know, Jonathan. I think that will certainly be a priority among Republicans, but at the national level, I say some sort of national laws to bring this into effect, there would need to be democratic cooperation, and they obviously are very pleased with things being as dismayed as possible because they thrive on chaos. So I think that in a state like Florida, there will probably be the call to just beat things up as much as possible. That maybe that odd precinct at the University of Central Florida will have something to do with that. But then look at states where it's really needed, like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan. They have divided governments, so it'd be very difficult to do there. But the legislature might pass stuff anyway, try to put public pressure on the executive to sign it. But then at the national level, if Trump wins, the House would still be under narrow Democratic control, and I don't think it would ever get through the House there. And in the Senate, it'd probably be some federalist LARPer who says, it's not the federal government's place to do that. I mean, on the GOP side, I could see that happening easily, you would get derailed because the GOP probably won a very large majority if he passes, which I think it probably will, but it's going to be a large one in any case. So it only takes a few difficult folks to derail the whole thing. So I think that it will force genuine election reform as an issue in people's minds and as an issue in the GOP community, what people encourage their legislators to focus on. But will any specific law come out of this at the federal level now? I don't think so. If any specific law does come out of it, probably in a state that didn't have these problems to begin with, really, like Florida, other than something curious like the UCF precinct. But that was the only thing going on that's curious, goes to show how well run Florida is. Rich, anything to say about what Jonathan brought up?
Yeah, because we do feel so strongly about this issue. It's probably getting a little bit ahead, but that's all right. I don't mind bringing it up. We are going to start an advocacy group that works towards election reform. And basically the pitch is going to go like this. If you don't support this, I'm going to defeat you. I'm going to hand select somebody who I know can defeat you. So you either...
Notice that Bing is blocking all links to revolver.news. So even Google is not doing that, but Bing, owned by Microsoft, currently blocking all links to revolver.news.
Support this bill, which 80-90% of your district supports, or you're going down or you're being replaced. Like you said, that's why this happened in Florida, because at once upon a time, Democrats were on board with this, and this was not controversial. It was we were really a laughing stock, and nobody, not on the right or the left, wanted this to ever happen again to us. Everybody for once came together and said it's more important that we don't look stupid and third world anymore, and that's why it happened. And also, there were Democrats who were concerned because the country started to sour on Gore. And they started to get concerned. You know what? I may go down with Gore here if I don't get on board with, it's just stupid stuff that every American, or at least a large majority across the political spectrum could agree with. Do you believe that voters should be treated the same when it comes to verification procedures?
Okay, that's a good section there from Cotto Gottfried. Here's something on Quillette. Desperation and the quest for control, the dangers of alternative medicine. I was surprised when a friend of 30 years asked if she could add me to her Reiki grid. A Reiki grid is a pattern made with crystals, allowing a Reiki practitioner to send healing energy to individuals whose names or pictures are placed on the grid. My friend is not a contemporary shaman. She is a hard-nosed, highly competent 37-year-old female attorney. She also has stage 4 breast cancer. Since her diagnosis, besides conventional cancer treatment, she has turned to alternative medicine and treatment modalities, including Reiki, which she credits for playing a large part in her health remaining stable. And what is Reiki? Let's call it energy healing. All right. A little bit of Reiki, a little bit of alternative medicine. And let's follow that up with, let's see what Matt Forney is talking about.
This or whatever, but just keep quiet. For president. And I was like, well, one, I wouldn't have won, right? Like, I'm not stupid. And getting a run for president is something that requires so much money.
This is Matt Forney.
We need to put that same amount of money, effort, organization, propaganda into building before we start. You have to walk before you can run. You know what I mean? To forgive the pun.
Mike Enoch and his National Justice Party.
So we need to build up a structure. And since there's so many disparate elements, like the alt-right, what was the alt-right, the alt-light, like these things have all kind of fallen by the wayside. People have developed into little mini factions around this or that personality or something.
By the way, that does bring up a good point. The PACs all do run ads and stuff, but like, are they going to run ads? Is the NGP going to be running ads on TV? Are they going to be taking out ad buys on fucking on fucking Breitbart or whatever? No, they're not going to be doing any of that shit. In part because number one, they won't be able to get enough money to do that, and number two, like, nobody's going to take their business. Number three, it's not going to fucking work.
Something like that. And we're like, well, let's put all that behind us.
By the way, I want to put, like, they're going to try, I'm surprised they haven't done it already. They're going to start doing, in real life fucking goon rallies again. Like, it's all but guaranteed at this point. Keep in mind that the American Identity Movement, the rebranded Identity Europa run by Patrick Casey, disbanded earlier this month. Now, I've got my issues with Patrick Casey, but American Identity Movement is far more successful and far more optical and far more influential than anything Mike Enoch has ever done. And they disbanded because they just said straight up, like, we're not really accomplishing much. It's just done. So why they're starting from these idiots have no idea what they're doing at all.
And just move forward and actually try and
By the way, more Streamlabs tips. You people are cheap.
create a poll.
That was a joke, by the way. I appreciate every and all donations, but we can use a bit more because I think we could use some Arini to detox after we're done with this. But we're still $48 away from the prize. So I love all of you. I'm not Owen Benjamin. Donate to me or I hit you. I appreciate every tip, every lemon, everything. But trust me,
We will be running candidates and we will be intervening in elections. But the electoral process is so rigged.
They're
in the
running
West. I'm not even talking
candidates.
about
The
Joe Biden,
National
I'm
Justice
talking about generally
Party.
speaking, like the worst way they rigged it in Philadelphia and Wisconsin is the Democrats went to court to exclude the Green Party from the ballot. When you do that, you cut off like tens of thousands of people. That would
that's not really rigging. I mean, it's unethical and sleazy and full of shit and garbage. But it's not. That's not what the rigging we're talking about, asshole. This is classic misdirection. These idiots have a term pill poll that they use to describe like these kinds of shall we say ethnic arguments. But the joke is that they talk about pill poll all the time. They engage in it themselves. This is by their own definition pill poll, because here he's talking about they've rigged it by not allowing the Green Party onto the ballot. No, they rigged it. They rigged it by barring access to Republican election observers. They barred it by ballot stuffing at 4 a.m. in the middle of the night. They rigged it through fabricating ballots. That's how they rigged it, asshole. Okay, the Green Party, yeah, that was unethical, but it was perfectly fucking legal. By the way, we have another Streamlabs tip from Leo Arini. He says $1, and he says, "You're just jealous of my cape." That's what you think. But thank you very much for the tip. We are at $3 now out of 50. Show me the money, folks. Show me the money.
for that party probably is actually that probably more than anything is what stole the election from Donald Trump. And when you do that kind of stuff, like the fact that they can even do that at all in a supposedly democratic country, and in the U.S. everything gets sucked in, all political energy gets sucked into one of the two parties, which is by design, and it prevents opposing and alternating political ideas. So you have this huge debate on the white nationalist right in the U.S. Like, do we work with the Republicans or not? And I think the answer to that has been decisively no, because they don't talk about it on the news. They don't talk about it in any media. They don't even really write about it inside their own publications. But as somebody who has done this before, has been doing politics for a very long time, both up front and behind the scenes.
I've been doing politics. No, you haven't, asshole. These are the people who think doing a 27 podcast series on Holocaust revisionism constitutes doing politics. No, you haven't. Okay,
I've been doing politics for a long time.
You've never volunteered for the GOP. You've never worked as a precinct captain. You've never worked as an election judge. You've never been in politics, Mike. Stop blowing yourself up. This is like Mike Enoch claiming that he's doing politics by running a podcast that nobody listens to aside from deranged lunatics and federal informants is like someone who works at a Walmart claiming that they work in the corporate world. No, you fucking don't. You're a minimum wage wage slave. Okay, you working at the Walmart greeter is not going to get you eventually up to the CEO position. For the same reason that hosting Stroik and Mike and running the National Justice Party isn't going to get you close to the levers of power in the United States.
I know people and stuff. The Republican Party has an entire apparatus designed to finding and destroying the lives of white nationalists.
Really? The Republicans? Are you sure about that? Are you sure you got the party right there?
They know that there are people that gravitate to them and try and do entryism into their party, and they have a whole apparatus designed to find them and destroy them. So it's like, and it's actually the only thing they're good at.
That's a conspiracy theory on par with Jarvanka. No, there's no organized conspiracy to fucking root out white nationalists. It's just that white nationalism is such an unpopular and ridiculous fucking position that you're not going to get anywhere with it. Not in the GOP and not as part of a clown car third party.
Right. Frankly.
I mean, I think it could be argued that they honeypot is a strong word, but you understand what I'm saying? There's like they have an incentive to lure people in and then to expose them.
Yes. I mean, I've seen it myself. I've literally seen it, and I've seen it happen to people over the years. And again, honeypot wouldn't really. Yeah, I know that's a different kind of. I understand what you mean. Like that's a strong word to use for it, but there is a apparatus. I would say there is one part of the GOP whose mission is to actually seek out people that are on the sort of further to the right or on the racial right, pro-white right, and things like that, and pretend like they're going to give them something, and then destroy them.
Frog whistling. They are frog whistling to them. I mean, that's a...
You people are so... None of the things about you, Mike. Like, you actually think they devote that much fucking mental energy to doing that? Like, no. No.
Maybe a more appropriate term for it.
So this links very well to a question I had written down. Because, yeah, obviously, like in Europe, in the national scene in Europe, I would say, we've been aware that there are people who claim our positions while maybe not having the best of intentions always. Like, basically, the counter-jihad movement is old, and we all knew about it. But at the same time, we got behind Trump with a vengeance, and we got fooled. And,
we got fooled.
You know, it's a bad feeling. It's the psychology of the con. Like,
he conned us.
As you start to understand that you have been conned.
I can't believe he didn't fire up the cattle cars on day one of his presidency.
And I never want to have to go through this again. So the question is, what is a litmus test for looking out in a very dynamic political landscape in Europe? And we start to see new political parties pop up, new personalities. Like, what is a litmus test to test the person to see if they are to be trusted or not? Is it even possible?
I don't know. On an individual level, you have to get to know them. I think when you look at movements and political movements and political sub-movements within parties and things like that, or factions, whatever you want to call them, like the counter-jihad would be a great example. Like, I actually knew about counter-jihad.
Nobody cares about counter-jihad. It's a fucking dead meme. Counter-jihad hasn't been relevant for nearly a decade. Get some new fucking memes, dude. This guy, you know, we talk about Arini is basically trapped mentally in the year 2014. Mike Enoch is mentally trapped in the year 2012. Like his brain is just frozen. He's throwing up counter-jihad now as an example. Like, Gates of Vienna, you know, Fjordman, nobody cares about those people. People listening probably don't even know what Gates of Vienna is, or who Fjordman is. They're irrelevant. By the way, we have a Streamlabs tip from OO Boogie, since $5. He says, get your own cape, make Leo jelly. Well, I do have a bunch of blankets here. But thank you very much for the tip. We are at $8 out of.
Them just because they don't belong there. We want to make Islam we want to either make these people atheists or make Islam liberal. We want to assimilate. And so I would say what it should be like, are you openly and forthrightly in favor of the people of this country, whether Sweden or America, on a racial, cultural, and racial and ethnic basis? Not simply are you fighting, are you a right-wing liberal, really? Are you fighting Muslims and Islam because it's illiberal, because it has anti-liberal tendencies? So that would be a good litmus test. Are you actually anti-liberal? Is it actually an anti-liberal party? Are you a person or movement or idea?
This guy's a communist. He's talking about anti-liberal. Pro-gay, you know, the DR is historically pro-gay, anti-Christian, and they're whining about liberalism. The fucking neck on this guy. My God.
See what I mean?
So,
I'd say that would be how I would look at it.
Is it time to retire the our guy meme, since nobody seems to be our guy?
Only our guys are our guys.
Yeah. Is that the position? I mean, it seems.
Hey, Supreme Revenge. What's going on with the United States Supreme Court, guys?
On the Democrats.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups.
It has become this completely politicized drama. He took the allegations away from Christine Blasey Ford and turned it into a huge fight between Democrats and Republicans. He's trying to rally all the Republicans to his side.
Kavanaugh had become a combatant in the war between Republicans and Democrats.
Does this reflect what you are? Does this yearbook reflect your focus on...
They squared off over his high school yearbook.
That's easy, yes or no. You don't have to filibuster.
And his drinking.
Freshman.
And I thought
No. I
thought only the Senate.
You got this up. I'm gonna talk about my high school. No. I'm gonna
let
talk.
him answer.
I'm gonna talk about my high school record. If you're gonna sit here and mock me.
Senator Graham.
On the Republican side, Lindsey Graham led the fight.
This is the most unethical sham since I've been in politics. Boy, y'all want power. God, I hope you never get it. I hope the American people can see through this sham. God, I hate to say it, because these have been my friends. But let me tell you, when it comes to this, you're looking for a fair process, you came to the wrong town at the wrong time, my friend. This is not a job interview.
Yeah.
This is hell. This is going to destroy the ability of good people to come forward because of this crap. Your high school yearbook.
It serves to rally Republicans and make it an us versus them kind of issue. And if it's an us versus them kind of issue, when you have the majority, that's what you want.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Cruz. Mrs. Ernst. Mr. Blake. Mr. Gardner. Ms. Duckworth.
With McConnell's Republicans almost entirely in line,
Mr. Toomey.
Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed.
Mr. Udall.
Partisanship would now reign.
More than any of the other fights, the Kavanaugh nomination hearings really ended up tarnishing the court's reputation as an apolitical institution. What seemed like a sort of shocking freak occurrence when it happened with Bork now seems like a fait accompli with Kavanaugh. He now is up there on the bench, and everybody assumes it's only because of politics.
With Kavanaugh's confirmation, McConnell had moved the court further to the right. But then, just over a month before the 2020 election, the death of the court's most prominent liberal, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Once again, it was Mitch McConnell's moment. He was ready.
This is a conversation that he has been having with his members at this point for a year or more. And McConnell made it very clear to his colleagues that if there is a vacancy, whomever that vacancy is presented by, we will fill it.
To McConnell, it didn't matter that it was only weeks before the election and that he'd opposed filling a seat in the last year of the Obama presidency.
The fact that it was occurring while the presidential election was underway, unprecedented. It's never happened in the history of the Senate. For all of their explanations and excuses, it's never been done. And particularly in light of what happened 4 years ago, it really seemed to be hypocritical.
But McConnell shrugged off the charges of hypocrisy.
It wouldn't faze Senator McConnell to be called ruthless or determined or whatever adjectives or labels people might put on his behavior. He did it because he could.
Today it is my honor to nominate Judge Amy Coney Barrett.
With Election Day fast approaching,
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give this committee?
the hearings for Amy Coney Barrett were a rush job.
Everything moved really rapid fire fast. And of course, the goal was to have her take her seat before the November 3rd election.
The hearing to confirm.
He said, "We are here to confirm Justice Barrett." Confirmed, which basically gave away the whole deal right there. It's like, we're not considering anything. We're just here to vote.
This is probably not about persuading each other unless something really dramatic happens. All Republicans will vote yes and all Democrats will vote no.
It was done in a hurry-up fashion. There was not even the routine investigation of opinions and writings and speeches. This was done in a hurry, and it showed.
To my Democratic colleagues,
The partisanship was on full display.
Our Republican colleagues are riveted on rushing a judge through this sham process.
This was a hypocritical, tire-squealing 180 for many Republican colleagues.
Democrats complained,
Hypocritical, illegitimate process.
but in the minority, they were powerless to do anything.
Mitch McConnell had the votes from start to finish. He knew it, and he behaved that way all along.
On this vote, the yeas are 52.
Barrett was confirmed. 52 Republicans voted yes. All of the Democrats voted no.
Of the Supreme Court of the United States is confirmed.
This most recent Barrett confirmation may have been the only one in recent memory that was purely partisan. It has become so bitterly partisan that the American people have no choice but to think of it as this individual is reflective of the people who vote against him or her, or the people who vote for him or her.
Just a week before the presidential election, the new justice was sworn in.
I, Amy Coney Barrett, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend.
Fellow conservative Clarence Thomas did the honors.
So help me God.
So help me God.
For Senator McConnell, this would be the achievement of his life's goal. With Justice Barrett on the court now, you have a solid 6-3 conservative split on the court.
3 decades after Bork, it was now Mitch McConnell's Supreme Court.
He has been working towards this moment his entire professional career, and it was all coming to fruition. All of the judicial wars that started with Robert Bork and Justice Thomas, the Kavanaugh situation, now was the moment that he finally got what he came for.
He has succeeded in establishing a conservative court for the next couple of decades at least. That's an accomplishment if you look at that alone. I think of the process, we've damaged another institution, the Senate. I don't think that it's a good trade overall, but in the end, will it have been worth it? I don't know.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has just won a 7th term.
On Election Day,
McConnell is the longest-serving Republican.
Mitch McConnell won another 6 years in the Senate.
We've reached a historic moment in this election.
He'll face Joe Biden as president, an old adversary from the judicial wars.
President of the United States.
Now the Supreme Court that Mitch McConnell built
Conservative majority on the court for the foreseeable future.
looms over the new president
Meanwhile, Democrats are worried about the country's future.
and a Washington as divided as ever.
A lot of eyes going to be on the Supreme Court.
Huge number of issues coming across the Supreme Court.
Among those issues are sex discrimination, gun rights, abortion, and immigration.
Huge array of enormously important.
Hey, Los Angeles has just issued a new stay-at-home order banning most gatherings. And Michael Tracy tweets, countless people online going to spend the rest of their lives inventing wild, elaborate theories to explain the election outcome because they can't possibly fathom that Joe Biden is 2 or 3 percentage points more popular than Hillary Clinton. So if it had been Joe Biden versus Donald Trump in 2016, I believe Biden would have won. All right, I'm reading a terrific book, Britain at Bay, the epic story of the Second World War. And the challenges that the leaders of Britain were facing remind me so much of the challenges that our current politicians are facing in dealing with COVID. So I'm the worst pundit around because I'm not here to tell you, oh, all the politicians are taking away our rights, man. It's outrageous. I don't have a strong opinion. But I do have a strong opinion that Britain at Bay, the epic story of the Second World War, 1938 to 1941, is a great book. The experience of the 1938 Sudetenland crisis, when Britain had also been on the brink of war with Germany, was not encouraging. A stream of fleeing Londoners had clogged the road arteries leading from the capital in the final days before the Munich conference. That's when Neville Chamberlain got a deal with Hitler and flew back to Britain and said, we'll have peace. Over 150,000 people had hurriedly decamped to Wales and the West Country. Now, remember, Neville Chamberlain, by holding off war with Hitler, he enabled Great Britain to rearm. So by 1939, Great Britain was finally spending as much on armaments as Germany. 3 years previously, Germany was spending 3 times as much as Britain. A year previously, Germany was spending twice as much as Britain. But by holding off on World War II, Great Britain was able to rearm. Over 150,000 people during the Sudetenland crisis had hurriedly decamped to Wales and the West Country, long faces, tearful women in streets. The noise of vehicles kept her awake all night. Gladys Langford, who I mentioned in an earlier stream today. Anyone who was in London in September and October 1938 must have been aware of something new in the moral attitude of the people, thought Wilfred Trotter, the social psychologist and author of the seminal work on group dynamics, Instincts of the Herd in Peace and War. Trenches were being feverishly scratched open. Many of those who could afford it were openly running away from London, and people of whose nerves better might have been expected confessed to an uncontrollable alarm. In the blackest days of 1917 and 1918, when Germany also bombed London via the air, no such moral landslide was seen. The stoical endurance of the Londoner had gone, and in its place was something to which the thoughtful mind could not refuse the ominous name of panic. Yeah. That's powerful writing. Although in the end, no Luftwaffe bomber appeared over the metropolis in September 1938, one of the consequences of the Munich scare was a rapid acceleration of civil defense programs. Already 38 million gas masks were distributed free to the public, 1 million feet of trench works dug in parks and other places to act as emergency shelters during air raids. Now the National Civil Defense workforce increased to 1.6 million people, most of them part-time volunteers. Auxiliary fire, first aid, and ambulance services were recruited. By the outbreak of the war, 1.5 million corrugated steel Anderson shelters had been distributed to households in kit form, which they could build in sunken garden plots, so they could build their own air raid shelters. Local authorities were encouraged to construct indoor and outdoor public shelters, the costs of which were subsidized by the central government. So what did these build-it-yourself Anderson shelters look like during World War II? The government would distribute these kits so that people could build their own.
That's one. There she goes. That objectionable young person whose voice we know so well. There she goes. That objectionable young person whose voice we know so well. And there go the Smiths to spend another night in their family shelter listening to the all-too-familiar concert. Chilly, uncomfortable, everybody getting temperamental. That one was a bit near. But there's no need for anyone to be so uncomfortable. You'll find in your letterbox a small official booklet which tells you how you can make your shelter much more comfortable. Wooden bunks can easily be made and fitted so that 6 people can sleep comfortably. Cover the frame with wire mesh and bend the ends of the wire at right angles. There's plenty of wire mesh available now. Hammer it into the wood. No nails or staples needed, but hammer them straight, not as Father is doing. You see here how the bunks are fitted into the shelter. For covering, sleeping bags are best. Don't forget some kind of mattress beneath them. Don't have any oil stove or brazier in your shelter. This little device will give you all the warmth needful. Just 2 flower pots and a candle. You can keep liquid hot in a hay bottle. The booklet tells you how to contrive this using some woolen material, some straw, and a little American cloth. Dress warmly before you go to the shelter. Don't risk getting chilled. Take your money with you and any important patrons. A cup of tea and a biscuit just before turning in, and now to spend a comfortable night undisturbed by the blitzkrieg. Haha, that sound wakes you all right. Nearly getting up time. Oh, hang it, the clock has stopped. Never mind. Thanks to taking the little precautions advised by the Ministry of Home Security, the Smiths have passed a comfortable night and are ready to carry on with a day's work in true British style. Now read this booklet carefully. If you follow its quite simple instructions, your health and comfort under difficult conditions will be assured. And perhaps like Father, you...
Man, we all need an Anderson shelter. Right. Life in an Anderson shelter during the Blitz of World War II.
Now, May, we go through this every night. I don't like wearing mine either, but we have to wear them as a precaution. We're just trying to protect you and do what all the other families are doing. All your friends in the street will be wearing one exactly the same right now.
Judith Thomas won't be. Her house was bombed. She wasn't in school yesterday and the teacher said she was dead.
I'm sure she's well, darling. Her parents perhaps sent her to the country to follow all the other child evacuees.
Perhaps like we should have done to begin with, Kathleen.
Oh, you would like that, wouldn't you, William?
She would be a lot safer there than she would be here right now. There are not many bombs falling over trees and fields.
She's better here with us. We can protect her and stay together as a family.
I don't want to go to the country, Mother. I'll stay with you, Father.
It's okay, darling. You're staying right here with us.
This is life in an Anderson shelter during World War II. Keep calm and carry on, guys. Bombs are falling, blitzkrieg going on outside, but the family's nice and warm and safe, all together. Comfortable. Keeping calm and carrying on.
Hey, what is it? What on earth is
it? A spider, a very big spider.
Oh, it's okay, darling. It will not harm you. Stop it! What's it done to you? Would you pass me that matchbox, please? Go on. Here you go. We'll set you free when all is safe and clear.
that's nice. So that's life in a comfy Anderson shelter. Like all the posh people now have them. So do you have your own Anderson shelter? So they had a reserve army in Britain to help control the population if panic broke out. There was an inherent tension in making such visible preparations for a knockout blow between, on the one hand, reassuring people that the state was protecting them, and on the other hand, terrifying them about the seeming inevitability of war. So during the Sudetenland crisis, a free pamphlet giving basic civil defense instructions was distributed to every address in Britain. 7 months later, 4 out of every 5 people polled by Gallup said they had no idea what to do if an air raid took place. When asked what the procedure was for disposing of an incendiary bomb, almost half the answers were so definitively wrong as to be a public danger. 4 days before the war broke out in September 1939, Edward Stebbing, teenager living near Helmsford, discovered that his 25-year-old sister Betty didn't know there was an audible warning system. What should we have to do? Get under cover. Where? Indoor and in an air raid shelter. If there was a gas attack, how would we know when to come out? There's a signal for that too. Oh, is there? At precisely 11:28 a.m. on Sunday, 3rd of September 1939, 13 minutes after Chamberlain broadcast to the nation announcing the declaration of war, the sirens went off across London and much of southern England for the first time. The official history of wartime civil defense recorded the moment like this. Civilians in the street were shepherded without ceremony by police and steel-helmeted wardens into the nearest shelters, or traffic stopped. Casualty and rescue squads stood ready in depots to rush to the scenes of attack, and officials waited in town halls to hear where the first bombs had fallen. Other accounts of the morning belie such a stiff upper lip image. So another observation, panic. People in the street begin to run frantically. People in homes and shops rush to the door. They remain crowded in the doorway. People in streets dive for any open door they can see. Policeman on bike waves people at the cafe door back. Go in. People go in, and then after a few seconds return to the door. Woman of 25 with pram rushes up, is helped into a cafe by 2 men who push back other men in the way. She is rushed away downstairs through the door at the back. Then a boy of about 15 runs up panting, looking terrified, and dives in. One of the commonest responses to that first air raid warning seems to have been neither gibbering dread nor the stoic civic mindedness recorded by the official historian, but rather puzzlement. Was this a drill or the real thing? What's the difference between the sound of the warning and the all clear? One civil defense worker got the two mixed up, played the all clear first. Had war even broken out? Many Londoners have still not worked out what was going on by the time it was all over. Without event, 20 minutes later, even the chief of the Imperial General Staff had no idea whether it was a test or not. So London on the morning of 3rd of September 1939 was a city largely denuded of people. 2 days earlier, Operation Pied Piper had been put into effect. Over 650,000 children, mothers, pregnant women, disabled people, and teaching staff were evacuated from London to what were assumed to be safer rural receiving areas across southeastern England. Parallel evacuations took place from all other major industrial cities across Britain. Almost 1.5 million people nationally participated in Pied Piper. So central has this experience become to Britain's memory of the outbreak of the war, particularly through literary memorials such as C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Evelyn Waugh's more sardonic Put Out More Flags. We forget that the official evacuation of children represented only a fraction of the total population movement in September 1939. 1.5 million Pied Piper evacuees left the cities at the outbreak of the war, then so did about 2 million private evacuees, some of them young children with their mothers, but many other adult men and women traveling alone. In Devon, private evacuees outnumbered official ones 7-1. The truly archetypal evacuee at the beginning of the Second World War was not a red-eyed East End waif with a teddy bear and a string parcel, someone who looked a lot more like Gladys Langford, an adult, probably middle class, fleeing to the countryside. Constantine Fitzgibbon recalls such well-heeled exiles streaming in cars and taxis past his mother's Thames Valley home in the hours immediately following the invasion of Poland. A horde of satin-clad, pinstriped refugees in various stages of hunger, exhaustion, and fear offering absurd sums for accommodation and food, gorging themselves on everything for sale that could be eaten or drunk before vanishing westwards. On the 28th of August, George Orwell noted immense quantities of expensive luggage building up at London railway stations. From the great book Britain at Bay, the epic story of the Second World War, 1938 to 1941.
If you have to match your signature on election day, do you think mail-in voting should have to match or have some kind of verification procedure? That's going to be 80-90% yes. Nobody has an objection to that. Even voter ID has majority black support. I mean, the things you would probably be surprised to hear because the media is so disconnected and so out of the mainstream, they don't ever tell you the truth. But we want to move people into this conversation. And Republicans, they would be stupid if the slogan wasn't "Revenge the Steal" from here. Or remember the Alamo, right? Remember the steal. They would be so stupid if they didn't make that their slogan for every special election from now until when midterms. And in fact, rehatch it during the presidency, because the level of anger that we're seeing right now is it's just palpable. And I don't know how that's going to fizzle over time. This is the problem with what they did. They really didn't think about the impact it would have on us. They didn't care.
Agreed entirely. And the fact that they didn't care goes to show you how arrogant they are.
Yeah.
It really does. And this is the last call. If you have a reasonable, responsible question or comment for Rich or myself, please do leave in the live chat. Super chat. We'll get to it. But this is the last call. So if you have something for us, please hurry up and get it out there. Now, Rich, this will be my second to last question. Not about election fraud, but about something else that you've been focused on. Fox News. It's been a while since we discussed this. But since that time, during that time, Fox had a ratings implosion. At first, it wasn't really all shows. It was the Hannity, Ingram, and Tucker were still doing well. But now it's getting to affect them too. And Fox News at this point is behind, I think, CNN and MSNBC in terms of ratings for all shows, not, Hannity, Ingram, and Tucker. So what do you think is happening at Fox News? I mean, go anywhere you want this. Is this something they planned for? They're doing it anyway, or do they think they'll get away with their more leftward drift or more establishment, Paul Ryan-like drift, whatever you want to call it, and they're just shocked at what's happening? Or am I totally off base in terms of how I'm looking at this? Please explain.
Yeah, and also just to say, Hannity has trailed Matt now several nights. So I don't know if that's a trend or just a little bit of a blowback. I'll say this: Fox has been a bit of a, I don't know how to put this the right way here, but Fox, with the exception of a handful of people, and I wouldn't even include the entire primetime lineup. I wouldn't. They pretend to be like the Hallmark Channel of cable news, right? But they're not really. Meaning they pretend to share your values as conservatives, as Republicans, but in truth, they never really did. Unless you knew people who worked there, or you knew the kind of politicians that they really rally behind, that they call themselves Republicans, then the public wouldn't know. It would take certain public decisions, like the ones Fox has made, to open their eyes. And going back even to 15 and then into 16, they made the very conscious effort. Everyone caught on to it, and they weren't fooling anybody. Chris Wallace, Megyn Kelly, Brett Baer, they made a very conscious effort to run interference against Trump for Jeb Bush when that didn't work, for Marco Rubio when that didn't work, on down the line until every candidate was gone. And their brand index, which is something that YouGov used to do, I don't think YouGov's a great pollster politically, and they should just stop polling. But when it comes to certain consumer research surveys, they had some pretty cool ones. And one of the ones I used to enjoy was the brand index. Fox collapsed back then. And it was really believed the first time that viewers got it in their minds, these guys may be frauds. And then, the stories came out. I hope you don't have any friends who are women who used to work at Fox, because you're going to hear some horrible stories. I'm just telling you. I mean, some of them are really bad. Like, you would never hear about this at Hallmark, folks. All right. I mean, it's not good. I'm not a shy guy. Some of the stuff I heard was, what it does as an alpha? It makes me angry. It makes me want to hit somebody, right? Because they're bad. They're that bad. And then, just so the basic idea that they weren't really up to this, right? They weren't really up to being the representative of a post-Bush Republican Party. They didn't speak their voice. And it just began to decline more and more as time went on. And under Trump, they began to prepare for a time after Donald Trump. They were very angry. They didn't get any DNC debate money. That was a huge deal over there. They were ostracized, and they wanted back in the media club. And, the 18 call, Joseph, you remember that? They made a very early call in the House. People weren't even done voting. Yep. That call in Arizona, and while keeping Florida on the board, when it was clear Florida was, we called on the election night coverage we called Florida at like 9 o'clock, 9 something. It was over. It was a very clear red right hook, and it wasn't even close. Trump stomped Biden in Florida. He stomped him. And to keep that call too close to call, but call Arizona, it was clear they were, I said this, and I stand by it. They called Arizona to have some kind of a predicate to stop the counting. And that's when it became, they needed a narrative change, which is that the president just lost a must-win state, and there's no way to catch up. And I think it's pretty clear that was intentional. And then all of a sudden, all states stopped counting. They refused to call these states. I think Fox thought there was another 700,000 ballots hiding somewhere in Tallahassee. I mean, it really was a scam, Joe. So if you can't see what a scam it was on election night, and I don't really know how to tell you, I don't know how to keep it up, but people are seeing this now. And Fox they're in trouble. They're in a lot of trouble. Because there are other places to go.
Absolutely. Now you have Newsmax, One America, so on and so forth. I say that as somebody who's not a big fan of cable news, and specifically One America, but there's no question that Fox has competitors now, which it didn't have just a few years ago. At least not serious competitors. And obviously none of his competitors are anywhere near the size of Fox, but they are out there. Newsmax makes itself available to watch for free via YouTube, so that is certainly something that is I think a big factor in people heading over there. Looking at what's going on with Fox, though, do you suppose they're trying to rebrand to become like a centrist type news network, sort of occupy the space on the field that CNN used to have until they lost their minds, or you think they still want to be like a sort of Republican leaning one, like a Paul Ryan leaning one? And this brings up the question of what Paul Ryan's influence. I think I wouldn't say for certain what sort of influence he's had as director of Fox News. But certainly Fox is giving up part of its formerly loyal base. And I just don't know whether or not that means anything to Fox executives. And if it doesn't, I don't know why that would be, considering that they're losing money.
I think they thought that the future belonged to the southeastern Pennsylvania Republican that Chuck Schumer was talking about, right? When those numbers never added up. All right. So for every 3 working class conservative Democrats that you lose, you do not gain multiple more from the southeastern Pennsylvania. But it's kind of the view that these people all have. And I mean that in even certain parts of the Republican Party, who really do feel that the Republican Party will be better off once Donald Trump is gone. They believe very much in the conventional wisdom, which is neither conventional anymore nor wise. Donald Trump won the most non-white votes out of any candidate in 60 years in a Republican presidential race. So for a Republican candidate. So, I mean, that didn't prove to be true either. Yet I can tell you senators who sat in rooms and living rooms, drinking eggnog saying, once we get rid of Trump, I really think that we can win a good share of the black vote. Well, Donald Trump doubled his vote with black men and women, which was something our polling did not consistently pick up on. We saw that. We saw that coming. We told you that was coming. Miami-Dade, certain groups of Hispanics, even out in Nevada, in Arizona. He didn't lose those states because he lost, large shares of the Hispanic vote, like Mitt Romney. He did better among working class people of all colors, race, creed, etc. But there's this idea that in the end, the future will belong to those yuppie Mitt Romney Republicans. That's foolish, but they believe it. I don't think they really have a future. I think they delude themselves. They don't even have a national constituency.
I agree. I agree entirely. And that's what makes Fox News, betting on these people so absurd, because any fool can see that they really don't have any large following. If there's no large following, who the hell's going to watch Fox? I suppose, before we move on and wrap things up, there is also the idea that Fox wants to get into entertainment now and wants to sort of lead news eventually. And so it might not even care about cultivating a loyal constituency for news watching. Maybe this is even part of the Fox plan, and perhaps an unexpected part of the plan. Maybe it came in too early, but Fox would sort of lose so much of its viewership that it could transition itself away from news toward entertainment. And then, what does it matter whether or not they're behind CNN or MSNBC when their news division is not long for this world? Rich, anything to say about that perspective?
Yeah, and Joseph, never underestimate how much they despise certain groups in this country, and large groups. You might call it middle America. Doesn't matter if they won your vote this time around or not. Understand, they can't stand you. Even Roger Ailes never forgot his roots in Ohio, where these Murdochs have, they popped out with a silver spoon in their mouth. I mean, so they have no interest in trying to relate to you at all. In fact, they're just waiting for you to kind of go away. Like, so at some point, I think they'll think they can phase you out like they phased out manual labor in the Midwest or something. Mm-hmm. So eventually you'll just be replaced with people who are more educated than you and smarter. And I really do believe that. I mean, when you talk to these people, that is the world that they see in the future. They don't see a Trump pictured world, where the world or the country that Donald Trump wanted to return us to, where an average guy or woman, maybe didn't grow up with everything, doesn't have the best degree in the world, could still make a living and support his family, keep their traditions, keep their cherished family traditions and communities and autonomous neighborhoods. That's the kind of America that Donald Trump sees and was trying to return. They hate that crap. They just don't like it. They think it's backward. They think it's time to move forward. And they think that you either have value or you don't. I mean, it's a very different philosophy, and don't underestimate that, because, we all are guilty of allowing our own worldview to sometimes taint our decision making.
Without question.
No doubt.
Yeah, and I was just about to bring up the last thing in the live chat. But it's something that you just mentioned. I've noticed it myself. There's no question that it's real. But it was very interesting that some of the foremost defenders of this new order that you refer to, there are people who come from backgrounds that are working class, blue collar, or lower middle class. They tend to be white ethnics, most often of like Roman Catholic or Jewish or Orthodox Christian background. And they live in the lower tier suburbs of large cities in the Northeast or Upper Midwest. And they are very susceptible to this whole reset that you're talking about. I think Anthony Scaramucci is sort of the personification of this trend. I have my own thoughts on why this might be, and I've shared them before. I won't get into here because it's really it's rather long. But any take, Rich, on why this might be, because you're so into looking at trends and why people do what they do, so on and so forth.
Well, in the specific case of the mooch, I mean, he just lost money. I mean, he's a perfect example. Trump cost him personally. So these are people who had hatch deals and hedge fund deals with, foreign interests under Donald Trump that just wasn't okay anymore, especially not in the middle of a trade war. Understand something. I was telling this to somebody the other day. Everybody should just come to grips right now. Like, if you're a worker in Erie, Pennsylvania, or you're a worker in Macomb, Michigan, or, Saginaw, whatever, understand if Joe Biden is the president in a couple of months, the trade war is over and you will lose, and you will be personally hurt by this. The person like Anthony Scaramucci, he just doesn't give a damn about those people. He cares about his hedge fund money. And during the trade negotiation strategies, those kind of deals were just not okay. And they all had to be put on hold under the Trump era. So don't for a second let Anthony Scaramucci fool you into thinking he had some kind of moral change at heart or some crisis of conscience. It was about, millions of dollars and hedge fund deals. That's it. That's all. And I think that those people, they don't, what's the word I'm looking for? They don't have to live with the consequences of their actions. They just don't. And for those who held on, or let me put it this way too, even their neighborhoods are split, because the secret or shy Trump vote that we had prodded for in our polling throughout the cycle, it was the same group of people over and over and over again that came up. They were black men and white women in the suburbs. In the end, there was not really this exodus of white suburban women that we heard about for 6 to 12 months incessantly by Nate Cohn, the worst pollster of 2020 at the New York Times. I mean, Nate, you blew it, man. You suck. And then others like at Morning Consult, who had the biggest average miss in any battleground state. It just didn't happen. He never polled well with them. In the end, those were the people who were themselves a little bit uncomfortable with what they saw, the direction of their neighborhoods moving in, but also highly susceptible to social pressures and bias, right? So if you're a young black man and you tell grandma or, the church that you're going to vote for Donald J. Trump, you may have a problem, right? If you are a woman who's at a Tupperware party and you want to be part of the clique, but you're not really you're not the Ivy Leaguer that they all may belong to, but now you find yourself in an upper to upper middle class suburb. You may not want to share that you think Donald Trump makes sense, right? Plus, don't underestimate the manhood, all right? Like the masculinity, the impact of masculinity. That it's just true. It appeals to men who might be attitudinally similar, and it appeals to women who, no matter what we say, Joseph, it's never going to change. Females are always going to find alpha men more appealing and more convincing than a beta who is weak and uncertain of themselves. And I think that we identify these people over and over. They're the ones who told us they believe there's a shy vote. They're the ones who told us they were uncomfortable being truthful with their friends, their family, and pollsters, because we asked about that. And over and over again, same groups.
And from Serious Cat 5000, is it true that for every fraudulent ballot, there's a real person behind it who didn't vote? If so, why not contact enough of those people to get affidavits to take to courts and state legislatures? I think this was very clearly intended for Rich. Rich, anything to say about what Serious Cat brought up?
Well, the bottom line is that I think the problem that the Trump camp is running into here, Joseph, is that it doesn't really matter how many affidavits they amass. The media just refuses to report it. So there are people, and if I heard or understood the question correctly, then this is the answer. There are people who, are those honest people, or not honest, but real people.
Hey, speaking of Fox News, what's going on there?
It was a fraud. Polls suggest many Americans agree with him, but the courts as of yet do not. So the question remains, will he be able to prove it, Congressman?
There's a difference between being able to prove fraud and then being able to obtain the remedies that would decertify election results. And I think the president has been pretty clear that he wants to expose the fraud, not just as a consequence of the 2020 election, but to try to ensure we have more integrity in our elections going forward. Take Georgia, for example, where we're about to have this high-impact special election. The consent decree that Stacey Abrams rather effectively litigated the state of Georgia into has dramatically reduced the amount of absentee ballots that have gotten rejected as a consequence of bad signatures. That number used to be 3.5%, getting rejected and falling down to 0.3%. That creates the opportunity for a lot more of those ballots that seem to go Joe Biden's way.
Jessica, it does seem that everyone, Republican or Democrat, would have a vested interest in exposing any potential irregularities in this election. And whether or not the president receives the remedies he seeks in these court cases, isn't that a laudable effort to ensure that our political system is honest and on the up and up?
Absolutely. I'm fully supportive of that. And people like Chris Krebs, who was fired by the president just last week, are in support of that as well. There are many officials who've come out and said that this is the freest and fairest election that we've had in American history. Irregularities should be examined, but we know now that we are moving to a model where more people will be voting by mail. And I believe it's 9 states do this anyway with regularity. And there's no reason that we can't emulate that in elections to come. But to the congressman's comments about what President Trump is after, he is after subverting the will of the American people. He wanted to stop the count in states where he was ahead, demanding the count continued in states where he's behind. He wants to disenfranchise black voters in urban areas, but wants to tout his 18% support with black men when it suits him. He can't have it both ways. Joe Biden won this election by an almost unprecedented margin. We're talking about Obama 08 levels, and the president needs to concede.
Please, I know you've written this. You believe that the president is at a crossroads. His political future or the power that he wields in the coming months is rapidly approaching a crossroads.
Yeah, I think that the congressman's right. He has a legitimate right and responsibility to question any irregularities that come up, and he's doing so. And that's not new. I remember Al Gore, 36 days. He didn't concede in 2000 till December 13th. That's about 2.5 weeks from now. And remember in 2016, it's tomorrow, November 28th, when Jill Stein, as a surrogate for Hillary Clinton, sued to overturn the election in 3 key states. Hillary Clinton, remember, and Hollywood people supported subverting the Electoral College because we heard nonstop television ads urging the electors not to follow their constitutionally mandated responsibilities. And of course, Hillary Clinton, by January, was saying the election was stolen. She joined the La Resistance and tried to oppose it based on the fraudulent dossier. And then 4 years later, in August of this year, she said that the election had been stolen and Joe Biden should not concede under, quote, any circumstances. So there's a history of acrimony. And what the president has to understand is that he's doing things legitimately, and then there's going to be a deadline, and that's when the electors meet on December 14th. And I think he's got to avoid conspiracy theories that he won a landslide by 70%. He didn't. But there's nothing wrong with saying this was an unusual year to massive mail-in and early voting, and we have to examine discrepancies, mathematical, statistical anomalies, all of that. But there's going to be a date when the electors are going to vote, and after that it becomes very problematic. And that's why he, I think, wisely is going down to Georgia. He's going to try to win those 2 seats. And then I think in the House race in 2022, it's going to be a whole different game. I think the future bodes well if he doesn't press it beyond the electoral voting and he doesn't get into the conspiracy theory. I think he's avoided that so far.
Jessica, to Victor's point, that many of the claims made by the left today are completely in contrast to claims they made just 4 years ago. Every claim seems to come with some burden of hypocrisy, whether or not with Stacey Abrams claiming fraudulent voting in her bid to become Georgia's governor. Congressman, I have to end with you, but I would like to ask you something that Victor brought up, and that is the president has said everyone in Georgia should get out and vote. There are others, like one of his attorneys, Lynn Wood, that said conservatives should boycott the Georgia vote. Where are you on this? Should conservatives get out and vote for David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler?
Absolutely. Senators Perdue and Loeffler are all that stand between our great nation and socialism, and so I hope that in and of itself is sufficiently motivating. But we don't have as united a movement in Georgia as I wish we did. I think that's the consequence of poor political leadership from Governor Kemp, and so we've got to go and fight with the team we've got, and it's my hope that we'll see a different type of electorate and a different type of outcome in the special election that's coming up in January.
And it sounds like the president will be down there campaigning for both of those senators. Jessica Tarlov, Victor Davis Hanson.
Okay. I want to get back in the final minutes, just a little bit more from this great book, Britain at Bay, the epic story of the Second World War, 1938 to 1941. By the end of September 1939, Greater London had shrunk by 1.4 million people from its pre-crisis population of about 8.6 million. The Liverpool area lost 86,500 residents in a matter of weeks, Manchester 123,000. When we consider those additional Britons whose lives were disrupted by the hurried diaspora, those who stayed behind, and those whose responsibility it was to care for the people arriving in their towns and villages, appears that up to a third of the national population was directly affected by this outgrowth of the autumn of 1939. Not everybody headed for the hills in panic. Some were workers whose employers had relocated. So 3,453 big firms left London by the end of 1939. Around 25,000 civil servants were swept up in Plan Yellow, the compulsory dispersal of central government departments across the country. The old and the poor in public assistance facilities were turned out to fend for themselves. So were over 5,000 prisoners. About 140,000 hospital patients, some seriously ill, were sent home to make way for the knockout blow casualties that never materialized. Other evacuees from London simply decided to make as much space between themselves and the German bombs as possible. Steady stream of Irish nationals headed home on the first weekend of the war. Can you imagine the pain, the agony, the dislocation that the English felt when all these Irish decided to go home? The only parallel that I can think of is, say, Americans and Californians who, under President Trump, saw thousands and thousands of their beloved illegal fellow, not quite legal Americans, not quite really legally citizens, but all the illegals leaving us behind. But the pain for the English and having the Irish go back to Ireland, it was just wrenching, heartbreaking. And you can see kind of below right here, you can see these are the Irish as they're gathering to leave England, even though the English are pleading with them, stay. We don't want the Irish to leave. We love the Irish. Some of the better off retreated to private hotels and guest houses not known on any Luftwaffe target maps, funk halls as they were known to those left behind. There in Lakeland valleys and seaside bays, they determined to see out the war, discreetly playing backgammon, drinking sherry, and knitting socks for the troops. So one of the reasons there was no mass panic in the capital in September of 1939 was that hundreds of thousands of those most likely to panic had already fled. The expected bombs did not suddenly fall from the sky that September. When the Blitz did begin a year later, Londoners continued to defy the melancholy predictions of the pre-war social psychologists. But by then, they had had plenty of time to mentally absorb and prepare for the ordeal ahead. They had those wonderful Anderson kits. While Britain's central and local governments had much improved their provisions, the bombing never reached the apocalyptic proportions that the pre-war military prognosticators had feared. What would have happened at the beginning of the Second World War had the Luftwaffe been in a position to unleash without warning a knockout blow against London on the scale that the experts dreaded? The contingency for which those keep calm and carry on posters were originally prepared is a matter for the imagination only. So Gladys Langford stayed in Essex until the 15th of September. By that point, a fortnight into the war, there had not yet been a single air raid on London, or for that matter, anywhere else in the United Kingdom. It was becoming clear that the capital was not, after all, facing imminent destruction. So thinking about how England tried to deal with the contingency of some massive Luftwaffe knockout blow on London, it just reminds me of the way that politicians around the world have been trying to deal with the COVID crisis. Langford came back to London, to a city that was not in fiery ruins or experiencing a mass psychological breakdown of its terrified survivors. The stock exchange and the banks had reopened. Theatres, cinemas, sports grounds, and dance halls were busy again. Londoners' struggles were with the prosaic inconvenience of wartime, most of all the tedious nightly shrouding of doors and windows with heavy blackout material to accord with the regulations enforced by overbearing neighborhood wardens. Doesn't this sound like the fussiness that we have with everybody wearing a mask when they go outside, etc.? Everyone loathes it and their nerves are on edge because of it, she wrote of the blackout. Friends and acquaintances declared they would not venture out at night any longer until the war was over. And in Los Angeles, we've been under curfew between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. for a couple of weeks now. Langford was not ready to go quite that far, but one does get depressed, she admitted. Every wall is unsightly with plastered posters. I am horrified at my beloved London's ugliness now. She's like an awfully ugly middle-aged woman who has lost all pride in her personal appearance. So, yeah, I often hear in like British speak or Australian speak, it's like, oh man, that woman, she's really let herself go to seed, hasn't she? Sad. Come on, ladies, you gotta keep up your appearances. Langford was not the only Londoner to slip quietly back to the city in the absence of Armageddon. By the end of September, at least 1 in 5 Pied Piper evacuees had been recalled home by their parents. By the beginning of December, over 4 in 10 official evacuees had gone home. By January 1940, it was 6 in 10. February, the government attempted to reboot the plan, distributing 9 million leaflets in a desperate attempt to persuade parents to cooperate and send their children out of London. But only 1 in 5 children in the evacuation zones registered. Evacuees would leave the cities in the end, but only once the bombing had actually begun. Bye-bye. Good night. God bless.